Okay, Chris, I'm making this video for you, but it's just good general information, so I'm gonna post it on the YouTubes. So you see me giving your coach the business, and notice what I talked about after you fought Cody Reese. He simply was absorbing the material, absorbing the content, and then he comes back out and he's gonna execute. So basically, for this fight, we want to try to keep him, not pinned up against the cage, and if we get pinned up against the cage, find a way to get off the cage. And if you notice also, working a lot of jabs and a lot of movement. We're not trying to be close to the opponent unless we absolutely have to be. And when we are, we engage with plan two, and that is, what do we do about the contact? So he's moving, he's entering on the angles, and specifically on the angles because straight lines will give up the takedown. And when possible, back your opponent up, back your opponent up. Now, for the opponent that we were training for at the time, it wasn't an absolute necessary to back him up. It was just necessary not to get pinned up against the cage. And when pinned up against the cage, do exactly what he's doing here. Hit, move on the angle, defend the position, and also escape when possible. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about you have to layer your game. It's not so much like, oh, I'm going to be a boxer and a wrestler and a jiu-jitsu player for this fight. It's more like you take your preferences, in other words, the thing you're training for, the thing you're doing. So in other words, we want him to move, we want him to angle. His preferences come from his jab and his footwork. So if based on what we want him to do, these are the things these are the tools that he uses to do those things. Then we put together those other obstacles, like the what to do when the contact does arrive, what happens if we do go down, and how do we get back up and get back to this. So we're building the game in layers, but it's basically just fragments of the same game, but we just kind of call it game one, game two, game three, game four, and we design however many layers we need. Now right here, Damon in the rash guard is, he's one of my better training partners because he knows what I want, and that is to get the takedown, that is to get to the clinch. But he's also fighting mid-range to confuse Isaiah so that Isaiah gets suckered in and then he can just go in. If he just stays on long range and bounce back, long range, bounce back, well, that plays to Isaiah's strong suit. But Damon does a good job getting in that middle range and getting Isaiah to engage. And then when Isaiah starts to stand still, boom, takes him down or enters on the takedown. And right here, he lets go. Now, I haven't watched this video in a while, but watch for Damon shoot back in. Exactly. That shot, reshot mindset. So in other words, he couldn't get him the first time. He was able to hit, pull back out, hit again, and go enter. And so Isaiah does a good job of staying on his feet the entire range. And here, we're going to give him some tips in terms of how to keep his weight down so that he's not being launched into the air. And I believe this was, we were getting ready for a Fight Lab fight because this was like 2017. So it wasn't a title fight. And we were just kind of looking at the things that the opponent liked to do. I can't remember the opponent's name, but we're just looking at things inside of the clinch when your back's against the wall, creating frameworks that he could use just to get back to where he wants to be. And if I do remember correctly in that fight, I think Zayd ultimately finished the guy off. He was taken down, but he used his jiu-jitsu to create openings, and he was able to get back to his feet in that fight and or at least end up on top. So now put James in, who's a lot shorter, and James is more likely to be in on the takedown a lot sooner than Damon because Damon has a stronger striking acumen, whereas James is developing his around about this time. So he's more likely to go to the clinch and the takedown game a lot sooner and try to get there, which is good because, like I said, in the last round, Zayd was able to get off and spend a good amount of time in that round not having to deal with the contact. Well, James is going to force the issue a little bit more. So because, again, that's his strongest style of fighting, so you might as well put contact on the guy. Even if you don't take him down, at least you're wearing him down. And then we get to see other avenues of the game that we need to work. Does Isaiah keep the same output when there is no contact? Say for instance, James goes in here 5-6 times trying to take him down, and let's say eventually if Zay gets away, does the output disappear just because of the contact? And that's another aspect of the game that we want to pay attention to. So again, this is all in the build up to the fight. So without me going through the historical record to see where we are for this fight, in other words, this could be week 1, and that will tell me a lot about what his conditioning was like. Now, at this point, we know Zay has strong jiu-jitsu, so he's using it to actually, get James to defend himself and use it to get back up. But again, it's still contact fighting, and this type of fighting wears you out, especially when the primary game that we want him to work is footwork and movement. The good news is if he can sustain it, he's eating up clock. And that's always a good thing, especially if you're in attack mode. Then what's going to happen is that the judges or the referee or whoever, they're going to let it slide. They're going to let it go because he's doing a good job. He gets the tap there. Good job. And speaking of the wall work, one of the things I've tried to encourage fighters as of late is to learn to do all of your games in different positions. So in other words, your grappling game changes when you're pinned up against a wall. You just can't do the same escapes that you're used to. You can't do the same entries that you're used to. So make sure you're playing all your games, your boxing game against the wall, your Muay Thai game against the wall, your Jiu-Jitsu, your wrestling game against the wall or the cage, so that you just get used to those tight spaces. You get used to not having those advantages. The cage is the gi for MMA fighters. That's very important. So looking back there at the clock, it's just ticking away. I think we're in the last 30 seconds. And again, if you outside of the submission, Isaiah hasn't done anything because James cut down the output. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about building secondary games. And I want you to get that idea in your head to try to build a game for yourself. I am Coach Sess, and you've had words with the Mad Coach.